I got a job in the summer of 1970 after a year in school to cover the Hare Krishna movement at the Brooklyn Temple. The editor of Asia magazine, who was an Indian, saw the devotees on the street. He was fascinated, and he saw my pictures in an agency in New York, called me up and asked me to do that assignment. So I had seen the devotees before. When I came back from Malaysia, they wanted to send me back to the Far East, to Vietnam. So I got a letter from the Peace Corps psychiatrist who was anti-war, saying that I was mentally unfit for combat, which I was. And so I took that letter downtown LA and gave it to the guy. I guess I was going to go in if they, took me in. And he said, "Oh, you've been in the Peace Corps, you can go home." He was sympathetic. I mean, he saw my record, 3 years overseas. So I opened the door, walked out on the street, and the first thing I saw and heard was the Harinam party. It must have been Vishnu John. So quite prophetic. You can go home, open the door. There's the Harinam party. So anyway, flash forward. I did that article. Vishaka actually stayed with me, or went with me, and wrote the article. I took the pictures. Published in Asia magazine, and I took that article. I was fascinated by the devotees from the very beginning. Vishaka was just the opposite. She was an atheist and very skeptical. So little tension there, relationship. But anyway, I went to India to do my master's thesis in photography after a year and a half in school, and got an address of where the devotees were in Surat. And I took a train to Surat and got off the train, and I didn't have an address. I thought Surat was a little village. It's a big city, So I said, all the rickshawwallas gathered around me. I said, "American Hare Krishna." They said, "Get in." The whole town knew about the devotees. It was a sensation. Prabhupada's formula for preaching everywhere was genius. So very quickly, the people of India knew about the devotees. So I went that night, knocked on the door, and Rishi Kumar answered the door where everyone was staying. And he was very surprised to see me. He was the first devotee I met in Manhattan, in Harinam. So he took me to Prabhupada's room and introduced me. And I showed Prabhupada the magazine article. He was very pleased. And he actually went through each page by page. And it was another article I had done in the meantime for Earth magazine. That was kind of a hippie magazine at the time. And quite a bit of nudity in it. So Prabhupada was just going through page by page. I was embarrassed. Until he came to the article on Krishna consciousness. He said, even there is gold in a dirty place, we take it. So I asked him if I could travel with the party and take photographs. And then he said something that shocked me. He said, "Are you going to become a devotee?" And I could not imagine at that point, shaving the head and wearing robes. So I said, "I don't think so, Srila Prabhupada." And then he said something else that shocked me. He said, "Then you cannot stay." So that was, I stayed that night. In the morning I got up, and nobody said anything, and Prabhupada didn't say anything, so I stayed for 2 months. But Prabhupada knew my heart. He knew that I had some attraction. And story after story about devotees. Prabhupada, understanding their mind and their heart. So it was very a wonderful time.
The first time I met Srila Prabhupada was in New York at the Henry Street Temple in Brooklyn. And it was a big festival. All the devotees were coming from all over the East Coast, all over America to see Srila Prabhupada. So it was quite crowded. very, very crowded. 1972 was around May, June, something like that, July, in that time frame, between May and July. And so I was a brand new devotee. I had just been in the movement like 2 weeks, and all the devotees were like trying to push me in front of Prabhupada. And at that time, we had those like, you know, red beads that were like painted as our initiated beads. But of course I was not initiated. I only wore one strand, right? So they made me wear that, you know, right away. They said, oh, you're going to go in front of Prabhupada. And I didn't have any idea who was Prabhupada or anything. So they pushed me in the front, and I was sitting there on the floor in front of Radha Govinda, but the curtains were shut at the time. And Prabhupada was not in the temple room as of yet. So everybody started to get up and sing and dance, and I heard the screaming and the Haribols, and I was so excited. I was thinking, who's this person I'm going to meet, right? So then Prabhupada walked in, and when he walked in, his presence was phenomenal to me, phenomenal. I remember I was like, wow, he walks like a swan, just like a swan. That's the first impression I was receiving, was he was like a swan. And he walked so gracefully, so calmly amidst all this dancing and singing and screaming and everybody excited, you know, Prabhupada. And then he very gracefully sat up on the Vyasasana, his eyes shut. And he sat very calmly, and then he just barely opened his eyes. And he was scanning the room, and he hit me. And he looked at me with such a depth of intensity. I said, whoa, he knows everything about me, everything. I said, this is the first time anyone has ever looked at me, looked at my soul. Everyone else sees this, but Prabhupada was looking right at my soul. He knew me through and through. I was kind of like startled. I had to turn my head. I couldn't look in his eyes. It was so powerful. And then, when I kept looking, I said, I know he is my guru. He is my guru. And immediately, that moment, I knew I was going to give my life to Prabhupada. It was so like powerful presence that I've ever met in my entire life of a person. So I surrendered at that very moment, that I was going to give my life and surrender to Krishna.
At one point, we were at the Kumbh Mela. We went to several places in India. Kumbh Mela was one of them. And at the Kumbh Mela in 1971, Srila Prabhupada had a whole party there. And I was still taking different pictures that excited me, different scenes, like the bathing of the pilgrims at the Triveni. I went down there one morning and taking pictures, and all of a sudden I get grabbed from behind. My camera snatched out of my hand. It's soldiers, the police actually, who were thinking that I was taking pictures of only the ladies bathing. They were very upset. They took me to their tent in the encampment and tied me to the center post. And I told them who I was, where I was from, and a little bit about Bhakti Yoga. I was doing a little preaching to the soldiers. And the head guy, he said, oh, I know yoga. And he pulled up his shirt and started rippling his stomach. Everybody was laughing. So they sent a note to Prabhupada that we have this boy, he's with your party. And so Prabhupada sent a note back. He said, Mr. John is a very nice boy. He's with our party. He's, please release him. So they did. So Prabhupada saved me. But there's an interesting fact of Prabhupada's preaching before he came to America, and that is that he did a lot of preaching. And we think that he wasn't very successful in India. He was tremendously successful with the upper class, the rich, the wealthy, the industrialists, the education people. And he did a lot of preaching, and therefore when we went back to India, people opened their homes, these very wealthy people, influential people.
Vrindavan, 1976, I had traveled from Dharamsala, India to Vrindavan because I heard Srila Prabhupada was coming. So I arrived there, and in the morning, and there was class, but I missed it. So in the evening, Prabhupada gave class under the tree, and regular, and was warm, and I sat way in the back on the steps. I was wearing a yellow dhoti and shaved head and a beard I had left over because I had come across overland from Germany all the way to India, going through Muslim countries. So as soon as the class finished, Prabhupada looked at me, turned, said, "You did not shave. Looks just like a Muslim." And so the next morning, I went to Loi Basar to get shaved up.
So part of the time in those first 2 months in India, we spent it in Allahabad at the Kumbh Mela. And it was very, very cold. Prabhupada stayed with us in a tent right in the camp. He could have stayed at the Gaudiya Math. He served there for many years in Allahabad. He had his business there. Could have stayed in a hotel, but he stayed with us. So that's an example of Prabhupada's renunciation and preference to be with his followers.
Well, I was living in the Detroit temple. I had joined the temple because I was a student at University of Michigan. I took a course in world religions. I had to visit 3 religious places. And I was roommates with Leka Shravanti and her boyfriend, and he said, "You got to go to the Hare Krishna temple. It's one of your religious places." So we drove down to Detroit, and I visited the temple, got a Bhagavad Gita, took it home, read the Bhagavad Gita, and then I said, "Oh, this is what I want to study, actually." And so it was very quick. I mean, we were in the school year ended. I had to do a course in British Columbia. So Braj and I traveled through the United States, and every weekend we stopped at a Hare Krishna temple, did my course in British Columbia. We came back and we just moved into the temple very, very quickly. So I was living in the Detroit temple, and that's the first time I met Prabhupada was when he visited the temple on Burns Court. No, wait, East Jefferson. I lived in a house on Burns Court later, but it was, I think it was Burns Court in East Jefferson. It was that temple. So the first time I saw Prabhupada was when he came to the temple. He was arriving into the front door, and some of the girls went up to the ladies' ashram, 2nd floor, and we went out on the ledge. I don't know who told us to do this. It's very dangerous. It was a very narrow ledge, and I have a fear of heights, but I didn't care. We were throwing flower petals down on Prabhupada. It was such a majestic scene, and then Prabhupada walks up, and he was surrounded by these very tall, burly men, young men, and he was so short, so small. I was like, I didn't expect it. I thought Prabhupada was going to be giant because he's such a powerful personality. Just to hear him, just to, get to know him through his tapes or his books or hear about him. So it was a really astounding thing for me to see him surrounded by these men, but the men were so protective. They just kind of made a circle around him as he walked in, and like nobody was going to get access. The whole time into the temple. It was so cool. It felt very, spiritual world throwing those petals down. So that was the first time I saw Prabhupada. During that visit, he gave a little darshan one evening, and we had everyone lived in the temple, but one householder couple had an apartment nearby, 2 blocks away. So we used their apartment for the evening darshan, and it was a very small apartment. So my mother-in-law agreed to come meet Prabhupada, and that was, kind of surprising. She was a very proper, impeccable lady, always looked beautifully dressed and very polite and very nice, but she said she wanted to do it because, we were interested in this. So she came to meet Prabhupada at the darshan, and we got to the door of the apartment, and we opened the door, and the room was full. Like, it was a small room, and it was packed, and I could see nobody was going to make a path for us or anything. So we just kind of stood at the door, and I didn't even think about her. I just was happy just to be seeing Prabhupada there, and he was relaxed behind his low desk, and the white sheets were on the floor and stuff. And but then he looked up, and he saw us at the door, and he could see that I was with, a mother. So immediately he smiled, like a huge, big, warm smile, and he waved us to come in, and he wanted her to come up to the desk. And she had brought a basket of fruit, which I didn't even tell her to do that. She just did it on her own as a polite thing to do. And he was so pleased. He just, you know, there's something about Srila Prabhupada, you got a lot of information just from his gestures and his look, because his senses were so much a part of who he was. So he was smiling very warmly, and it put her completely at ease. And I think he said a few things to her, like, how are you? And, you know, like that. And then we just sat there down by the desk, and he had his darshan. I don't remember too much about it, but the next day, I think he might have had left. So I went into the apartment to clean, and in the kitchen, he had eaten the fruit, and all the fruit rinds were laying there on the side of the sink. And that was like the greatest nectar a devotee could get. You know, when Prabhupada had sucked the orange clean, and you could just, I mean, we were just like eating those rinds like they were, you know, strawberry shortcake. It was amazing. They tasted better than cake. They were so good. So that was like a special treat.
So at one point during the Kumbh Mela, I was very cold in the morning. I was very lazy. I wasn't getting up for Mangalarti. Living with the devotees, it was difficult for them and me. So I left and I went to Benares. There was a friend I had there, and so I stayed with him for a couple of days, knowing that Prabhupada and the disciples were going to come to Benares. That was their next stop. So when they arrived, I got noticed that they were at a certain person's house, so I went to that place. It's very strange because Prabhupada and the devotees stayed there, and when they came, everybody left. The whole house just left, all the occupants. So I went to the backyard, and Prabhupada was sitting in the backyard with his devotees. And it was a beautiful scene, sunlit, and Prabhupada in his sannyas top. And Prabhupada had broken a pot of gur and given the pieces to devotees to lick. And he was also licking a piece. So I just walked into this scene, and it was, it was fantastic. So Prabhupada looked up at me, he said, "Ah, Krishna has captured you." So that was wonderful. New York City, 1976, we were coming down from the skyscraper building, temple, in the elevator, and Prabhupada was on the 11th floor, I believe, 10th maybe. And on the way down, Prabhupada looks at us and he says, "I want the privilege of fighting for Krishna." At that point, his health was deteriorating. He was just so determined to preach.
Now this was in Florida, Coral Gables. Prabhupada came there when, I think his name was Abhiram, the temple president. I don't remember completely, but I think it was Abhiram. So he was the temple president at the time. And I was in Brahmachini at the time, living with Nartaka Gopala, very nice devotee. So I had gotten Brahmin initiation. And Prabhupada was in the temple room at the time, and we all came in and we were all excited to see Prabhupada, and we were singing, and I wanted to touch Prabhupada's feet. I really wanted to touch Prabhupada's feet. So everybody was going up and touching Prabhupada's feet and offering obeisances, but the temple president told us that Prabhupada did not want the women to do their dandavats, only to bow down with their knees bent. And I thought, what? I'm giving my whole life to Prabhupada. I'm doing dandavats. What is this? Just do halfway, you know? Because that's the way we always did it. We always paid full dandavats. So when I went up to Prabhupada, I just started crying. Tears poured out of my eyes. And I fell flat like a rod in front of Prabhupada, like, I give you my life, my everything, you know? And then within a few minutes after crying, you know, and feeling the holy presence of Srila Prabhupada, I stood up, and it was like, I couldn't touch his feet. I was so afraid to touch his feet, and I just immediately turned around and went back to the space, right? And I was dancing and singing, happy, and then I thought, darn, I didn't get to touch Prabhupada's feet. So then Prabhupada was leaving. He put his socks on, and he was leaving, and I said, now is my chance. Now is my chance, my last chance. So he was walking right by me, and I went down, and honest to God, there was like a shield that I could not go through, like a full-on glass shield. it was in the ether, and I couldn't push my hand through it. And I was like, wow, Prabhupada is so protected. Wow. I could not literally push through. I started to cry, and Tulsi was there. All the Tulsis were there in the greenhouse right next to where the temple was. And I said, oh, Tulsi Devi, please, please let me touch Prabhupada's feet. Please, Tulsi Devi. As soon as I prayed to Tulsi Devi, my hand went right through the shield and touched Prabhupada's feet. And I was crying, I was so happy. Then I realized the power of Tulsi and the power of Krishna's protection to his pure devotee. How Krishna showed me. You surrender to me, you're protected. And Prabhupada was oblivious. He was just smiling and walking. He wasn't thinking anything about a shield or any of those things. But yet Krishna showed me the power of the protection that he gives to his pure devotee, and also the power of a pure devotee, how the pure devotee can make Krishna break whatever rule he was trying to dish out, right? But it was beautiful. And then I was able to touch Prabhupada's feet.
Bombay, 1971, Prabhupada got permission to go to Russia. Wonderful story about how Shamsundar got the details and arrangement and visa and all that. And he thought it was impossible, but Krishna paved the way. So before Prabhupada came that time to Bombay, he was arriving, well, the day before he came, the whole city was washed clean by rain. It was not the rainy season, but I just thought this was suitable for Prabhupada's arrival, to wash the city clean. So the day that Prabhupada was leaving for Russia, Brahmananda Swami said, Prabhupada, you can't go to Russia, it's mango season now in India. Prabhupada's immediate response was, preaching in the snows of Russia is sweeter than any mango.
So a few days later, I actually moved in the temple, in the ashram, because I was staying in the guest house. So after I moved into the guest house, one older devotee came up to me and said, you are helping me to clean Srila Prabhupada's quarters. I said, come on, I'm a new person, no. Anyways, he said, no, you are helping me clean Prabhupada's quarters. As soon as I walked in, Srila Prabhupada said, no uninitiated devotees in my quarters. Okay, there, I got humiliated twice, and taught me that humility is very important.
So before Prabhupada had his place in Juhu, he was staying at different life members' homes in the city. One was Kartikeya Mahadevi's. And every night Prabhupada would speak to guests. And one night he was very, very heavy to the Indians, but all Indians. That famous verse about how Indians should make their life successful and preach Krishna consciousness all over the world. He was practically yelling at them. It was just so intense. And they were sitting there just listening. And but such potency Prabhupada had. He was so encouraging and heavy. And as a result, we find many Indians, have come to the movement. And that was the seed, Prabhupada's heavy preaching in the early days. And it's just it's gone, viral. So many Indians, and we should welcome them. Sometimes we say there's too many Indians or not enough Westerners. That's true, not enough Westerners, but we should really encourage and welcome the Indians. One day we were at Kartikeya Mahadevi's and Prabhupada was taking a bath. And after maybe a half hour or so, he came out of the back room. And we were all lined up, ready to greet him. And Prabhupada came out, and he just looked effulgent. He was beaming. And as he passed by us, he said, back home, back to Godhead. And we just got this whiff of sandalwood oil and just transcendental, transported us.
One time he was sitting it was an afternoon, it was like a late afternoon, and he was sitting out on the side lawn looking out at the canal that goes by the back of the temple. And it was a beautiful day, and it was a lovely scene, and it was just Srila Prabhupada on this, this comfortable seat, and I sat there, and I think there were maybe 2 other people. They were kind of getting ready, I think, to have a darshan, and maybe they were setting up a recorder and stuff. But Prabhupada looked out, and he said, "This is the most beautiful place in the world." And I was like, what? It's the Detroit River. I mean, I don't, it was prettier then than it is now, because now you looked across the canal and there's condos there, but then it was just like a little woods. But still. So I thought, oh, anywhere where Prabhupada is the most beautiful place in the world. This is what that means. That's what it meant to me. And that was a very nice visit, because Lekha Shravanti, who was a good friend of mine even before we were devotees, she had wonderful family connections in the city of Detroit. Her father, of course, was very famous and very loved. And so she used those connections to bring important people to meet Prabhupada. And he was very happy about that. He met many different people over the course of staying with us in the temple. And one time I got to go to one of those darshans. It was with 2 priests. And one was an older priest, and I remember him being a very important person, maybe in the Archdiocese of Detroit. There's a lot of Catholics in Detroit. And then the other one was a younger priest, and I thought maybe it was his assistant or just a junior person, but still he was also a priest. And, they, out of politeness and interest, maybe they came to meet Prabhupada, and it was an interesting experience listening to Prabhupada exchange with them, because I could start to see how muddled their thinking was, especially the older priest. Like, he was talking in circles and not really saying much about his kind of understanding of God. And Prabhupada was speaking quite simply and clearly and trying to get it through. And at one point, it came out, well, I think Prabhupada used the word foolish, like, foolish men who don't understand God, we will not be able to, put them in the top levels. And the priest, I think he misunderstood and thought the word foolish might have meant mentally deficient or something. And so in a sense, not understanding who you are in relation to God is a mental deficiency, but they had a little, so the priest got very defensive in a way, and he started saying, no, we work with the poor and the mentally handicapped, and he kept saying the word handicapped, and finally Prabhupada said, handicapped is handicapped. That's another matter. That's not what I'm talking about here. But the priest couldn't, he was in a loop, and he couldn't let it go. And Prabhupada started to say, if I cut off my hand, can you fix my hand? Can you do anything about it? And the priest was like, well, no. Well, that's what I'm telling you. Handicapped is a different thing. We'll discuss that later. But now we want to bring people to the level of God consciousness. And then he started to say how you can't really get there if you're eating meat, if you're killing animals. And I sat there listening to all of it, and I thought, I had this realization, I actually know more than these guys. And that was a big thing. I was a young girl, and I have a respect for elders, and I realized that they really didn't know that much. And it became really apparent the way Prabhupada interacted with them. And he wasn't demeaning them at all, but it was frustrating that they could not understand. The younger priest was a little bit better at understanding, actually. He sort of got it more. And in fact, he really, by the end, he was very enamored of Prabhupada. And I think I read in Hari Sari's diary maybe that somebody said to Prabhupada after they had left something like that younger priest, he was ready to become your disciple. And Prabhupada said, yes, if you speak the truth, they will become your disciples. So that was pretty fabulous, that whole experience for me, hearing Prabhupada speak to other religious person like that. Because I think most of us who became devotees then had the experience that whatever religious path we had been raised in was not answering the questions for us. I think that was a kind of a universal theme of the 60s and 70s anyway. So there it was, in real life, in real time.
This is 1976 in New York, the skyscraper building. Prabhupada was in his room, and the associate press reporter was interviewing him. And Prabhupada was explaining how we're not the body with the example of the driver in the car, which is, for all of us, it's very simple to understand. This man could not get it. Prabhupada was so patient. He just explained over and over, because the man was actually sincere. He wanted to know. And Prabhupada, whenever he could see a sincere person, he would spend a lot of time. And this man was very sincere. Finally, the guy got it. And and sometimes Prabhupada would be extremely abrupt and even cutting with people. If they didn't have any, I can't say why, but they didn't have any interest maybe, or just another person to meet offhand. But if someone was sincere, Prabhupada he knew that, and he would spend a lot of time. Prabhupada was in Delhi, and there was a meeting in Kurukshetra of different philosophers and yogis, and the meeting was to discuss Bhagavad Gita and finding peace through the Bhagavad Gita. So Prabhupada was asked to be one of the head speakers. So before we went, Prabhupada was questioning all of us. We were in his room. I think Brahmananda Swami was there, Achyutananda Swami. And Prabhupada was first of all debating whether to go or not. So finally we decided that we should go. And then Prabhupada was talking about who should go. He spent so much time on first of all, whether we should go and then who should go. So finally it was decided that myself, Brahmananda, Achyutananda, Prabhupada, and the driver. I forget who the driver was. So anyway, Prabhupada was the last person to speak. And we had to sit through all these speeches. Most were in Hindi. In fact, all were in Hindi. So I could see that Prabhupada was getting, he didn't like it. He didn't like being there. And finally he sat down and started speaking, and the essence was, he spoke in Hindi, but he told us later what he said. He said that if you don't accept Krishna as the speaker of the Bhagavad Gita and Krishna as a person, this whole assembly is useless. And after he said that, he just got up and walked off. And that was it.
So I joined, and Prabhupada was giving class, and different devotees were fanning or chamara on Prabhupada's yasasam. So I had the desire to do that too. So I went up and did the chamara to Srila Prabhupada, but there was a fly, it was bothering him. But I was not very good at it, and I did not know that the chamara was allowed to touch the face. Prabhupada just made one movement. Get rid of this guy.
We were on a morning walk in Hyderabad, and somehow the subject came up of bogus gurus who claim that they're God. So Prabhupada asked us, he said, how do we know they're not God? So I never said anything until the end. And the usual answers: can't show the universal form, he's not predicted as an incarnation in the scriptures. The Prabhupada wasn't satisfied for some reason. So anyway, a few days earlier, I had read in the paper that this Guru Maharajji, this 15-year-old so-called God, had gotten a pie thrown in his face at a reception in Detroit. It came out in the New York Times, and it was printed in Indian newspapers. So finally I said, Prabhupada, he's not God because a person threw a pie in his face. And Prabhupada said, yes, this is proof. We were at the Bhaktivedanta Manor in 1973, and that was the time of the installation of the deities. Prabhupada was in his room, and some guests came. It was Donovan, the singer, and a friend of his. So there's some talk back and forth. And during the talk, his friend told Prabhupada and everyone that he was God. So Prabhupada asked for a dictionary. So somebody brought a dictionary, and he said, look up the definition of God. So somebody read it, the devotee read it, and it said, the Supreme Being. So Prabhupada looked at him, he said, so you are supreme? And there was silence. Defeated.
Prabhupada was taken on a palanquin down from Govardhan Hill to go back to his room. And it was kind of muddy that day, a little bit of mud everywhere. And Samadas, who was the temple president of our particular temple at the time in Baltimore, he was following and paying his dandavats all the way down the hill. And then there was this mud puddle where Prabhupada was going to get down off his palanquin. So immediately he took off his full trotter and he threw it down on the floor. And Prabhupada looked at him with such love. Such love. I'll never forget how the love with which he saw that he was willing to give his own cloth. And Prabhupada walked right on it. And he was like, Prabhupada. It was so beautiful. Because the devotees were my mentors. And I learned from them the devotion and love. They taught me how to love Prabhupada. So it was a beautiful thing.
So in Prabhupada's room at the Bhaktivedanta Manor, 1973, and he was being interviewed by a reporter, a lady reporter. It was summertime, and she had a miniskirt on. So her first question to Prabhupada is, why do you have bald heads? And Prabhupada immediately replied, why do you have bare legs? Better to have a cool head to understand this Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada immediately had an answer, and just everybody laughed. Everybody just cracked up. This story was from Detroit, and Prabhupada was being interviewed by a reporter, and she was remarking on how wealthy we must be. You know, so many cars and so many this, and Prabhupada, when he heard cars, he said, yes, we have many cars. He was playing with her, basically, you know.
So my next service was cleaning the temple room 4 times a day. So, but they gave me only one. I'm new, I have no idea what I'm doing, but they gave me one Indian, also brand new devotee who was not very enthusiastic about cleaning. So we cleaned, but Prabhupada said to the old devotees, the temple is not clean. The temple, they said, no, Prabhupada, we're cleaning, the temple is clean. So one morning, he took a metal thing, walked around the back pillar, and which you could not see from the front, and said, what about all the pigeon poop? So everybody was quiet after that. We had to clean that part too.
In the early days in Bombay, we were on a morning walk with Prabhupada. And he was taken to his morning walk very often by a lady who offered to drive him. He didn't have his car at that point. We were staying in the Akash Ganga building. And so she picked Prabhupada up. We were on the morning walk in Worli, on the sea face in Worli. At one point, she turned to Prabhupada. She said, Prabhupada, I would like to tell you about some investment. I feel it's a really good investment. And if it's successful, then your devotees won't have to work so hard to collect money. And Prabhupada said, I want them to work hard. He wasn't interested in the investment. He wanted us to go to work, to go door to door, to preach. So she accepted that and understood. We were in Mayapur in 1972 for the Gorpurnim festival. At that time, there was no permanent structure except Prabhupada's hut. We were sitting in his hut, and that was the time that Bob Cohn was there, Brahmatirtha now, and his questions and Prabhupada's answers provided material for the book, Perfect Questions and Perfect Answers. At one point, one devotee asked a question, it wasn't Brahmatirtha, he said, what is meant by the separated material energy of the Lord? And Prabhupada at the time was drinking milk. He just held up his glass and he said, "This is the separated energy of the cow." So perfect.
I mean, I don't even know if this is a quality, but and you could relate it maybe to compassion, but he was so personal. And that's something that I felt from him every time I was in his presence. Like the incident with my mother-in-law, he was very, very personal with everyone. And that's why it's upsetting when you see that devotees don't act with each other in personal ways or in the ways that Prabhupada acted with us. And you only now have to look at the memories of Prabhupada, the memoirs that people have written, to see what Prabhupada really was like. You can get that. So I was very, very touched by his quality of personalism. And it's a good reminder for me because I'm a manager also, and plus just I have that kind of personality. I could be, harsher than I might want to be. So remembering that Prabhupada he just appreciated everything and anything anybody did to help him in his mission. Really appreciated it. So who are we not to appreciate each other?
We're in Prabhupada's hut again at the Mayapur Festival in 1972. And Prabhupada looked so beautiful in that hut. Just such a renowned sannyasi. And one time he told us, he said, "You can build me the biggest palace, but I prefer to stay here." A beautiful example of his renunciation and not hankering for wealth or prestige or anything. Satisfied with Krishna. We were in Paris in 1973 at the installation of the deities. And after the deities had been installed, there were kirtans in the temple every morning, really nice kirtans. So I had been filming the deity installation. Vishaka was doing the sound work. And at one point during the kirtan, evening kirtan, I had my still camera, I was taking pictures. And then I put it down and started dancing in the kirtan. And then I look over at Prabhupada at one point and he motions for me to come. So I had to go really close to his mouth because it was an uproarious kirtan. Hansaduta was leading. And I hear the Prabhupada say, "Never put down your camera." And I ran back and got it and started taking pictures again. This is one instance, Prabhupada asked me to never put down my camera, of his understanding that the visual media is extremely important in our preaching. And that was demonstrated also by our first film. Prabhupada actually financed that film. Karandar Prabhu asked us to make the film, and he consulted with Prabhupada first. There were no films at that time on the movement. And Prabhupada gave the go-ahead. He also gave $16,000 from his book fund, which was somewhat unheard of at that time. So that showed that Prabhupada had understood the importance of media. And he also agreed to do a series of lectures for TV. That really didn't work out. But Prabhupada wanted that medium. And we see today that so many people are not reading. It's important. Prabhupada knew that.
So one morning I was sitting in front of Prabhupada's quarters, and suddenly Hari Sori come running out and said, "There's one person that one could hear the flute playing somewhere in the guest house." That disturbed Prabhupada. Prabhupada told Hari Sori to tell me, because I'm the guard outside, "Go tell him to stop playing the flute. In Vrindavan, there's only one person playing the flute." So I had to go up and tell the guest, but I was a little bit forceful, but I had to tell the guest that flute playing has to be stopped.
The highlight of our filmmaking was the premiere for Prabhupada. Prabhupada saw 4 of our films. The first film was the Hare Krishna People, and that was released in 1974 at the Mayapur Festival, and we showed it in Prabhupada's room. And I was very embarrassed because when the film started running, it was running at a slow speed. I didn't get the voltage regulation right. And everybody sat through it. I mean, the narrator was, but everybody sat through it and liked it. Prabhupada said we used good psychology in making that film. And I wish I asked him what he meant by that. But I didn't, but I assumed that he meant that we tried to make it for the public as a preaching tool. And we've done that ever since, actually. The latest film, the Hare Krishna movie, Hare Krishna, the mantra, the movement, the Swami who started it all. We just really, every cut in that, we just were thinking about the public. And also making it acceptable for devotees, of course. Another story from the premiere of the Hare Krishna people in Prabhupada's room in Mayapur. Everybody gathered in Prabhupada's room, a very small room. Most of us have been there. So there were GBC, there were sannyasis, there were temple presidents. It was completely packed. And then Vishaka was standing in the doorway, kind of stranded outside. And he motioned for her to come and sit next to him. And there were sannyasis, again, it was completely packed. So Prabhupada looked at them, and they were kind of not moving, and then he just, he said, please come. And Vishaka came over and sat next to Prabhupada. Just an example of Prabhupada's caring and for everyone, including the ladies.
So I wanted to take on more service for Prabhupada. So Pender came to me the next day and he said, can you do the breakfast because I want to go to Prabhupada's classes. I don't ever get to go to the classes. Would you mind making Prabhupada's breakfast? And of course I acted like I knew what I was doing. I didn't, but I acted like, I said, oh yes, of course, I would love to do that. No problem. I was already doing the Govindam prayers and dressing the deities, which is a very tight squeeze to make the breakfast, right? Because it's right during the time when the class is going on and all that. So I said, okay, I can do it, right? So I dressed the deities, and then I started doing the Govindam prayers. And Prabhupada goes, excuse me, tell that lady to get out of the way. Because I was standing right in front of the deities, and I wasn't aware of it. I was just doing the chamra, right? And I was standing right in front of the deities. And I felt so humiliated. I was so sorry. I was blocking his vision of the deities. I felt horrible. So then anyway, I got off the altar, and then I started to make the breakfast. And Prabhupada had sandesh, he had fried nuts, he had hot milk, he had some halva, he had some fruit cut up. So it was a lot of things actually to get organized. So I look in the fridge and there's no sandesh. And that was his favorite thing. And I'm like, oh no, I don't know how to make sandesh. I didn't know how to make it, So then there was some curd in the fridge. And I thought, oh yeah, you roll the curd, you make a ball and put sugar. So my kid mind thought, okay, let's put it together. So I took the sandesh, the curd, I rubbed it and rolled it and rolled it into a nice ball. Then I rolled it in sugar, thinking that was sandesh, right? And I put it on the plate. And then, meanwhile, I'm doing that, and the nuts are burning. Prabhupada's cashews were burning. And I was like, oh, no. So I ran over the stove, and I'm like, oh, no. So I quickly had to put some more in, put them on, and then the milk started to boil over. And I'm like, oh, Krishna, help. I'm getting the milk, and then I poured it into the silver cup, which gets extremely hot when you put hot milk in the cup. So I wasn't thinking. So then I made the whole thing, and I put the sandesh, and I thought, oh, Prabhupada's going to be disappointed with this breakfast, I know, because it's just not so nice. I was sad. And I said, I know, I'll put a lot of tulsis on, and tulsi will make Prabhupada forgive me for making not a perfect looking breakfast, right? So I went and I got all these tulsi manjaris, I mean like a handful. And I covered the entire tub of the plate with tulsi, which was not a good thing, but I thought it was a good thing at the time. I thought it's going to get his mercy toward me, because I always knew what I was doing. So I put it on and I painted the plate. It looked very beautiful. Everything looked nice. So they brought it in, and I had to bring the hot milk in. And I had this apron which was quite dirty looking, stains all over it, And I walk in the room and all the sannyasis are there in front of Prabhupada. And I'm like, oh no, I've got to go in front of all these sannyasis and my hand is burning. I mean, literally I was so afraid I was going to drop that cup. It was steaming hot. It was like fire. And so I went in, and I didn't want to pay my obeisances because I was afraid that I would drop the cup. So I went over to where Prabhupada was, and I remember Prabhupada, he was sitting so still that you didn't even know he was there. He was so still. His watch would stop running because he was sitting so calm and still. So I looked, and I just put I was like, my hand was burning, and I tried not to show that it was so hot. And I put it down, and then they put the plate there, and I left. And I paid my obeisances at the door at a distance, and I left. And then, a little bit later, Upendra comes in and says, you made Prabhupada's breakfast. Prabhupada says, please, only one tulsi per preparation. He says it took him almost 20 minutes to take all the tulsis off. I was like, oh no, that sounds so bad. But it was like Prabhupada was teaching me by my mistakes, but he appreciated my desire to serve him. But he didn't eat the sandesh. He didn't, and he always eats the sandesh. So I felt very bad that I didn't make the proper way of sandesh. Then Yamuna shows up. Yamuna, and she made sandesh for Prabhupada. So I wanted to see what it looked like. So she came, and she just walked right in Prabhupada's room, didn't even knock, just walked right in the room. And I was like, whoa, who's this lady? I didn't know who she was at first. And I said, she's very special. She just walks in Prabhupada's room. So then before she had gone in, she showed me the sandesh. It was so beautiful. It was little conch shells with a beautiful tin foil around this little like jewelry box. And she had them all lined up perfectly fine. There was 8 of them. She had them all in a line with one little baby little tulsi leaf on each preparation. Prabhupada ate every single one of them. He loved them. Her devotion was like unbelievable. And when she left, I said, so this is really bhakti, not my little kid stuff, you know. So it was beautiful, and Yamuna is so exalted, you know, very exalted devotee.
This was in Bombay, not at the first Cross Maidan Pandal, but another Pandal. I think it was the second one. And Prabhupada gave a lecture, and there was kirtan. And then that final kirtan, Prabhupada at one point got up off his Vyasasana and started circumambulating the deities. And he went around once, went around twice, and the third time, as he came around from the deities and everybody saw him, he was dancing. He had his arms upraised and he was dancing. And at that point, the whole audience just rose off their feet and started dancing with their arms in the air. It was extraordinary. And we could just feel the birds of sinful activity whoosh off the audience. I mean, it's just like a rush. It was just incredible. Prabhupada's potency.
In the morning classes, Srila Prabhupada spoke in English. And after one of these classes, one of the devotees spoke up, and Srila Prabhupada and asked a question. I don't remember what the question was, but Prabhupada looked at him and said, have you read all of my books? No, Srila Prabhupada. Don't ask any questions till you have read all of my books. That was very significant to me because the latest book had just come out was 7.3, and I was only up to 1.3, so I knew no questions on my behalf.
This is Calcutta Temple in the early 70s. And Prabhupada was staying at the temple. I was in Bombay at the time when Prabhupada arrived back in Calcutta after his South India tour. He went to Madras and some other cities, Vishakhapatnam and so forth. I stayed back. Vishakha went on that tour, but I stayed back in Bombay to kind of hold the fort down. I was the secretary at the time. So after Prabhupada arrived back in Calcutta, I went to see him. I took a train, and I arrived in front of the temple and got out of the taxi. It was nighttime, and I immediately looked up in Prabhupada's window, and he was in the window, and he motioned for me to come up. So I went into Prabhupada's room, paid obeisances, and he started talking about the Bombay project, how important it was, and the difficulties he had in securing that property. By this time, Mr. Nair had passed away. And Prabhupada then said something extraordinary to me. He said, Mr. Nair was such a rascal that I prayed to Lord Nrsingadev that he be punished. And I was just stunned. Afterwards, that story is well known. I heard that when Prabhupada got the news by telephone in New Zealand, that he put his hands together and said, Jai Nrsingadev. One devotee said, I thought that Vaishnavas don't curse anyone. So Prabhupada didn't curse anyone, he just prayed to his Lord. And his Lord did what he wanted to do.
So every morning, at that time, Srila Prabhupada, about 6:45, he came out for his morning walk. And we walked around the temple and several times before he went to greet the deities. So on one time, suddenly he stopped. And he said, so everybody stopped. And by that time, you had about 50 devotees behind him. But because we could only, in the back of Vrindavan temple, only 2 people next to each other fit. And I was always right behind Srila Prabhupada. So, of course, it disturbed a lot of the old devotees because the new bhakta, what the hell is he doing in front, behind Srila Prabhupada? But I made sure that nobody squeezed me out. So he stopped and he said, how many times do we walk around the temple? And people said 3 times. He said, no, 4 times. 4 times around the temple is like a trip throughout the whole universe. Another time on this morning walk, Srila Prabhupada he did it several times, several days. First he said, look how fast I am walking. But I was a little used to that because some old men, they like to do that, to tell the young people, see how fast, and he was using his cane, how fast he's walking. But he did it several days in a row, and I realized after the 2nd or 3rd day, when Prabhupada wanted to go fast, he can really take off. You know, you had to start running. He was just, so he exhibited a potency which, And another time, because I was right behind Srila Prabhupada, for some reason, somebody decided that I should not be there, and for some reason they pushed me into Srila Prabhupada. I really actually pushed into Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada turned around, but he was incredible. He could see immediately the second that it was not my fault, and he stared at that person who pushed me. And after that, nobody ever bothered my position at this place.
We were trying to film as much as we could for the biographical film of Srila Prabhupada's life. So that was 1975, Los Angeles. We filmed so many things, all the activities that Prabhupada did. We were filming him chanting japa in his room. And at one point, Prabhupada looked at us and he said, such a nice engagement, husband and wife. So I took the opportunity to ask Prabhupada, I'd been wanting to ask him, Prabhupada, in your books you write that marriage without children is 0. He said that is for ordinary people. You make Krishna your child. So that's for very advanced devotees. We hadn't done that. 1977, April, Prabhupada was invited to go to Rishikesh, to stay at a member's house, to get his health back. Prabhupada liked that idea. So we all went. I drove Prabhupada's car with another devotee up to Hardwar to meet Prabhupada at the train station. So Prabhupada got in the car and then he asked us to try to find in Hardwar a jalebi shop, kachori shop that he used to go to. And so I don't know how many years ago that Prabhupada went to this place, but we drove back alleys, little tiny lanes, and and we could never find it. So we went on to Rishikesh. Once there, we didn't have a cook. There was nobody at that house. So it was decided that to hire a cook. And Prabhupada said, don't hire a cook, I'll teach you to cook. I was quite amazed that here's Prabhupada in 1977, again teaching us how to cook. There were quite a few devotees there. Tamal Krishna Goswami and Bhakti Das Brahmachari at the time. Maybe even taken sannyas, I forget. So anyway, Prabhupada said, go buy vegetables and prepare them, and then I'll come and teach you. So we went and bought vegetables and cut them up, and it was a huge mound of vegetables, like American style, lots. So Prabhupada walked in the kitchen, he looked at the pile of vegetables, he said, you have ruined everything, and walked out. So we were kind of, waiting, and Prabhupada came back soon after and started to teach us. So the first preparation he taught us to make was bhati chichori. It's a burnt preparation he used to make on the Jaladuta. I may have pronounced that incorrectly. But vegetables, potato, brinjal, eggplant, tomatoes, and lots of ghee and a few spices. And Prabhupada turned up the flame at the highest and walked away. So it started sputtering and burning at one point, and we asked Prabhupada, should we leave it on? He said, yes, just keep it. So at one point, he turned the flame off and scraped the bottom and mixed it throughout the preparation. So that taste would be there, that burnt, smoked taste. He liked that a lot. I cooked the same preparation the next day, and Prabhupada said I didn't burn it enough. Anyway.
So one of the morning walks Srila Prabhupada he decided to walk to the new Gurukula building. But in this morning walk, there was just me and Smarahari. So we're walking into the kitchen, the new building, new kitchen of the Gurukul building downstairs. Prabhupada walks in and he said, where's the door? There's supposed to be a door between these two rooms. I had no answer. Smarahari gave some answer, and then Prabhupada said, that are you Westerners. Always, no, Smarahari said, well, we'll put a door, we'll build a door. So Prabhupada said, yes, you Westerners, always breaking and building. No door. You left no door, there won't be a door.
Well, this is 1976, Washington, D.C., the 200th anniversary of the founding of America. And Prabhupada was there. One day we took a caravan down to, actually it was the Independence Day. We took a caravan downtown D.C. to watch the fireworks. And Prabhupada was in the caravan. So we had Harinam Sankirtan all the way down in a van with a side door open so people could hear it. And people were drinking and carousing and dancing to the kirtan, drunk. And we got down to the mall and we spread a blanket for Prabhupada to sit on. And the evening time came and the fireworks started. It was an extraordinary display, the 200th anniversary of fireworks. So Prabhupada, he didn't spend long. And his comment was that I heard that he said, just some flickering on the eyeballs. This huge extravaganza, some flickering on the eyeballs. But Prabhupada really liked the kirtan and the people who responded to the kirtan. That was his main takeaway from that day.
This was also in Berkeley. So every day I would clean Prabhupada's room, and I'd go in and clean it. And Rukmini showed up. Rukmini Dasi, she was an older devotee at the time, a senior devotee. And so I was taking all the vases out of the room, changing the flowers, cleaning the carpet, everything, cleaning. And she saw me bring the vases out. And she said, why are you bringing out the vases? I said, well, because, you know, they're starting to wilt and the little smell, I think, is coming from the water. No, no, no. Prabhupada likes you to leave the flowers in till they're almost dead. He doesn't like you to take them out of the vase before they're finished their life. And I went, they're kind of not so nice looking, you know. Please leave them there. Prabhupada will get upset with you. She was telling me, and I was like, okay, you know, because she was senior, so I didn't want to, you know, question her. And so Prabhupada came back to his room, and as soon as he walked in the room, first thing he says is, why these vases were not taken out and cleaned? Where is the person that took care of my room? And he said, why you didn't change the vases? What could I say? I didn't want to get her in trouble. You know, I just kept quiet. I said, oh, I'm sorry. And it was more like Prabhupada was kind of saying, you've got to listen to yourself. Empower yourself. Don't just, if someone says something, you don't just obey it. You know, if you really feel that something needs to be done, that's also Krishna in your heart telling you, you need to do it. So I knew that it was, I could smell it. And he said that. First thing he said is, there's a strange smell in here. I think it's the flower vases. So then I took all the vases out, cleaned them all up, and put fresh flowers. He was very happy.
During the same time in Washington, D.C., there was a lot of discussion with the Bhaktivedanta Institute members about the moonshot. And one day, after extensive conversations, the next day, during Mangal Arati, Harisari Prabhu comes out, he was Prabhupada's secretary at the time, comes into Mangal Arati and gets Vishaka and I. He said, Prabhupada's asking to see you. So we went into Prabhupada's room. It was very dramatic. He had this one light on, and he had his kind of resting like this, and the light kind of shone dramatically from the side. And he just paused. We just paid obeisances in silence. And Prabhupada eventually looks up at us and he said, take it from me, they didn't go. And that was it. We didn't comment, we didn't say anything, and then somebody else came in the room.
One of the mornings before Prabhupada was chanting the not the Govinda prayers, you know, before the class, so having a kirtan, and I'm standing and everybody's dancing, and Hansaduta was playing the mridanga, and Prabhupada went. He wanted, so Hansaduta didn't know what to do, but then he went again. So he told them to give up the mridanga and give it to Tranakarta, because Tranakarta was an expert mridanga player and Hansaduta was not. So he wanted the best people in the best position. So, and not, it's not who was older, but who was the better player. Mayapur 77. We just had the new Prashadam building, and Srila Prabhupada was coming back with two sannyasis, walking slowly back from the Prashadam building to the temple. And along the wall at that time, there was the wall, but there was no stores yet. There was some pictures and there were some benches. And there was one devotee couple was sitting there, not close, but sitting there talking. And then Srila Prabhupada, he pointed. And then I couldn't understand, but by the time he walked where I was, I immediately asked the sannyasis, what did Prabhupada want? He said, in Mayapur, householders do not sit together. You come alone, it's a place for renunciation. There's no householder business. You should completely be separate.
This is in Vrindavan, the end of October, early November 1977. Prabhupada was preparing to leave. And I was sitting on the side of his bed, massaging his arms. Other devotees were massaging his head and feet. And at one point, his body started going through some contortions. that seemed like he was in great pain. So I asked Prabhupada, "Are you in pain, Prabhupada?" If he answered yes, then I would try to do something. He looked at me like, "What kind of a question is that?" He said, "No." So Prabhupada was not affected. So I could understand that Prabhupada was completely detached. He knew 100% fully that he was not the body. And we can see that in his purports in the Bhagavatam from that time. We were fortunate enough to film him during that time. There was resistance for us to do that. Tamal Krishna Goswami didn't feel that it was appropriate to show Prabhupada in that condition. So I would be kind of hounding, trying to get in the room with my camera. And just, hanging out at the door and being a pest a little bit. And so one point, Tamal I don't think we had our camera then, he asked Vishaka and I to come in and see Prabhupada. So he started glorifying our service to Prabhupada. And then he started speaking about Vishaka's service, what a great writer she is, and so forth. And Prabhupada listened very carefully. And then he said, yes, but Yadubara came first. And that's a whole other story going back to Rishikesh. In Rishikesh, 8 months earlier, I was in Prabhupada's room with him, staying up with him during the time in Rishikesh. And there was a mosquito in his net. And Prabhupada asked me to get inside the net and get the mosquito out. And it was a twin bed. And it was dark. And I climbed in. I don't know if I got the mosquito out or not, but I tried. And then climbed out. And then Prabhupada, he asked me how I came to Krishna consciousness. And Prabhupada was interested how devotees came. So I explained how we came, that I was very attracted and Vishaka was not so attracted, but later became a wonderful devotee. So Prabhupada remembered that all the way until 1977. Prabhupada never forgot anything.